had a happy childhood. When I went to school, I was severely bullied. I started to think I was dumb. I had a huge inferiority complex. I grew up always thinking that everyone was better than me. When I got to high school, the pattern was the same. I would do anything to make people like me. It snowballed. And that's when my anxiety started.
You're listening to Not the Same, a podcast that brings you true stories of real people sharing their personal testimonies of transformation. I am Rachel Heinberg, your host. Today's episode is with Cathleen Mofokeng. Cathleen is a part of our congregation here in El Dorado Park. She has recently married Sanele Mofokeng, the man who runs our drug rehab program, Choose to Change. He was also a guest on this podcast last season and shared an incredibly moving testimony. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Thank you, Cathleen, first of all, for agreeing to share your testimony.
Hello.
I know you're younger than my typical guest, but you have a good testimony. I thought it would resonate, so I wanted to hear it. And I didn't mention that your mom was also on the podcast. If you guys remember episode 2, I believe it was, Lindsay Steinbank, that is Kathleen's mom. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Maybe just start with growing up. We kind of got a background of your parents, but as early back as you want to start, and we'll go from there.
I grew up in the church. The year I was born, my parents were launched out of the Bible conference.
Wow.
They were launched a Friday, the following Thursday I was born. So I've always been, for the longest time, the pastor's kid. I knew the lingo. I knew praying in tongues. I knew healing.
So growing up in that environment, you don't have any memories of your parents not being pastors when you were young?
No, none.
What church was it?
The first church they went, if I'm not mistaken, was Lenasia.
Okay.
There was a pioneer work. I don't remember Lenasia. I was too young. I remember bits and pieces of Verlam from Durban. And I remember pieces from the church in Crisville. And then the most recent one in my memory was in Innerdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's 4, basically. And you are the oldest?
Yes. I've got 2 younger sisters. And being the oldest, I just always looked out for my sisters. I had a happy childhood from my parents' side. My dad and my mom did the best they could. They didn't come from very stable, nice homes. I never saw my parents fight or argue. My home life was very stable growing up.
How was it when you started school?
That's when problems started. So everything kind of went down. I grew up around church kids. So for me, praying in tongues and speaking about Jesus was completely normal. And when I went to school, obviously you go to people and they have whole different backgrounds and different religions. And even some Christians don't really believe the same gospel that you believe. So there was a lot of clashing. And I was very, very opinionated. And I would be the child no one wanted to hang out with. You know, when you were doing something wrong and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. The Bible says it's wrong. All throughout primary school, I was very open. And I remember our school had these concerts that they would do. And I remember saying, I'm not going to be dancing on stage like that, dressed like that, doing those things. Wow. It's not going to happen. Which ultimately left me to be the outcast. You know, I was the butt of every joke and I was severely bullied by my teachers and my peers.
By your teachers as well?
From grade 1 up until 7.
What kinds of things? I'm just trying to picture as a teacher what.
I am a dyslexic and I didn't know I was dyslexic until the 11th grade.
Oh, wow.
But it's something that I was born with. So when I was going to school in grade 1, my teachers told my parents, your child can't read. She just memorizes things. She can't read, she can't spell, it's a problem. Not knowing much, they kind of thought I'll grow out of it. You know, I'm just a little bit slow. I didn't.
Wow.
So
real quick, let's stop there. So I've never really talked to anyone about how their experiences were. For you now, you're an avid reader. So it's curious to me. Did you find it difficult to learn how to read?
My brain adapts.
Okay.
And the reading for me is difficult. And again, I was gifted with an extremely good memory, which helped. So, when you read to your kids and you kind of point to the words?
Yes.
My mom would point to and I would memorize that's what the looks like.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be able to break up the sounds or the vowels. So if you were to give me an English word I've never seen before, there's a 9 out of 10 chance I won't be able to read the word or pick up what it means.
Okay.
And that's how my brain adjusted. I didn't notice it, especially with reading. My brain, it was just trying to fill in the gaps. I was a little bit slower with handwriting and neatness, and then spelling. Till this day, I can't spell.
Yeah, because those all go hand in hand.
Yeah, the speech to text function is my best friend.
For sure.
That's just how it is. And this was one instance in the 3rd grade, my teacher would pass my book around to all the kids and say, look how dumb I was being, and this is not how you spell, or this is not how you write. And each child looked at my workbook and this is not what to do.
How did that affect you when you were that age?
It hurt. I mean, I was already excluded and a joke to all my peers, and kids can be very mean. And so when your teacher kind of just gives them more fuel, it wasn't until that moment where I started to think I was dumb.
Wow.
I never noticed my learning disability. It never affected. But when she did that, now I started to think I was stupid. And then I started to pick up the fact that I couldn't spell. And I had lazy teachers. They wouldn't write things on the board, so they would read out questions and you had to write the question. And while writing out the question, I don't think I got a single word spelled right. And so then you notice things like that. And then you start thinking, I'm really stupid. All these kids are writing, they're reading, and I'm dumb. I had a teacher in grade 4 tell me I was demon possessed because I suffer with tonsillitis and my tonsils were constantly inflamed and I was out of school. And she said to me, your parents need to figure out which sins they committed that you're getting punished for. I also had teachers completely not take my side of things. When I would retaliate or I would lash out at the kids that were bullying me, I would get yelled at, I'd get shouted at, I'd be told I'm out of order, and the kids would get a hug from the teacher, sorry, this mean girl's doing these things to you.
Yeah. How did that counter with your parents? Because obviously your parents weren't like that. Did they try to help you with this, or was it just they didn't understand? Or how was that dynamic at home with them trying to counter?
They didn't know.
You never told them?
There were instances where I felt like this was something that I needed to tell my dad and my mom. And whenever those things did occur, it just got worse at school. Like when my parents left. And I know one instance I'll never forget. I was sitting alone in class. All the girls went to go play netball. And I'm an artist, okay? I don't want to be on the field. So I was the only girl in class, and there was about 17 boys in my class at the time. And they all look at me like, hey, Kathleen's the only girl. Let's rape her. And they start talking about what they're going to do.
What grade was it?
I was in grade 6 or 7. And they were like, let's do this. And I got up and I walked out. I was extremely uncomfortable. I grew up from a very Christian home. A lot of the things those boys were describing, I had no idea what it was, and I just didn't like the sound of it.
Yeah.
I told my dad. My dad came to school. Obviously, the teachers took it seriously. Not seriously enough. Nothing happened to those boys. But I remember walking back into class while my dad was still outside, and the entire 40 children in the classroom called me dramatic, were laughing at me. Boys will be boys. It's just jokes.
Wow.
No one played with me in school. It was always like, oh, she's too holy for this and too holy for that. I got made fun of. It was like guys would, when they want to tease their friends, they'd be like, yeah, you're going to date Cathleen. And the guy would go, ew, that's disgusting.
Wow.
That was every day since grade 1 up until grade 7. Grade 1, they would steal my snacks and push me off the slide. And then right up until I graduated, I was the butt of every joke. I was constantly just made fun of.
Well, what did that do to you? How did you manage emotions and stuff? What did that do to you?
I had a huge inferiority complex. If those things were done to me when I was a bit older, maybe I'd have dealt with it better, but I was 6. How does a 6-year-old know? And so I grew up always thinking that everyone was better than me. Again, my parents were very loving and supporting, and at home, everything was fine. I went home to a good environment. But I started comparing myself to my sisters. They're very academic and I'm very artistic. So I never thrived in school. Up until I graduated matric, I wasn't an academic student. I would always compare. Like my sisters are better than me. They're prettier than me. Kids at school were better than me. So when I left, I didn't deal with it. I just was like, oh, well, I'm graduating. I'm going to high school. So I'm never going to see these people again, whatever. And all those words, all those things were just kind of there and they were never dealt with.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you have your home life, which is positive, and then you have the school life, which is negative. But a lot of times we compartmentalize those things. The good doesn't bleed over to the bad, but the way the devil works, right? We take the bad things and we just believe them. 5 good things said about you doesn't counter 5 bad things. It's like 5 good things or 10 good things can counter 1 bad thing. Our nature is to believe the worst always and not believe the truth. That's why we struggle with God's love. That's very difficult. Yeah. And you said you never shared. You didn't want to share. It was just...
I never. I've always had a hard time talking about my feelings. Like it's not something that comes easy to me. And that's just one instance. There were times when I did tell my dad, told my mom, and obviously they reacted, they went to the school, but at the end of the day, it just got worse.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep quiet because it's bad when I say something and it's bad when I don't, but it's less bad when I don't. So I'm just not going to say anything. And I was still very strong in my faith as a child. You felt like God could do anything in the world. And even the December holidays before I got to high school, I was praying and I want to get into this particular school. When I got to high school, I was still on fire for God, 13-year-old, still believed in the power of Jesus Christ because I gave my life to Jesus when I was 9 initially. I can't tell you when that switch changed, but I remember it was the first or second week of school, and I realized the pattern was the same in high school and in primary school. And I remember thinking, Jesus, you didn't defend me in primary school when these were happening. These are high school kids. You're not going to defend me now. And I was like, if that's the case, I want nothing to do with you anymore. So I went from being this innocent Christian girl to doing everything I said I wasn't going to do. I became a telepathic liar. Before I hated it, I couldn't lie. I was always a very honest child. And I would look someone in the eye and I would blatantly lie. I would do anything to make people like me in high school. My home life to my high school peers was very exciting. It wasn't that exciting in reality. Half the things didn't happen. I could lie about experiences I had. When I was in grade 8, I never touched a cigarette, but the other kids that were a lot more naughtier than what I was have, and I'm an actor. So that also kind of helps me because I was very convincing. And it got to the point where I couldn't even tell the truth anymore. Wow. There were many instances where I just didn't need to lie and I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth.
Wow. So you said that was a conscious decision.
Yeah.
Since that didn't work, let me be this person and let me
fit in. I didn't want to be the outcast. Yeah. I had friends. Yeah. And they were my buddies, I was catching on nonsense. I always said I was never, ever, ever going to date until it was time for me to get married. I was dating in high school. I didn't believe in drinking alcohol or smoking, and there I was.
So let's go back to when those things started. How old were you when you first decided, okay, I'm going to try alcohol?
14.
Okay. Where was it?
At school. I could never go home and catch on nonsense because at home I still had a very secure and stable and strict household. My parents were still very much don't do it.
They're pretty smart.
They are. My mom's been through a few things. She'll be able to tell. So, amarula, the alcohol, it looks like coffee.
Yeah.
So if you sneak it with a few ice cubes into a coffee mug, whatever, no one's going to be able to tell. And it's high school. Teachers are not going to come and smell what are you drinking? They don't care. I never smoked weed, but it was easy for me to eat edibles because there was no smell.
For sure.
So while my friends would roll blunts up and stuff, I would be eating a brownie.
Yeah.
Maybe I could hide the fact that I look high when I get home, but that smell sticks in everything.
For sure.
And I had friends that were sneaky and conniving, and I could get away with things.
So you'd say 14 is when everything at once, or did it kind of snowball?
It snowballed.
Okay.
It started off with, oh yeah, I'm just going to sit here while y'all do it, knowing that me being here was wrong in and of itself.
Yeah.
And it didn't even take months before I was in
Full on.
The joke at school was about how high my tolerance for things were.
Wow.
Because it went from me never eating an edible to like me having to eat everything that is laced with weed oil and baked in this, and the whole day for me to like get a good high.
Wow.
Because I wasn't, you know that saying, it's always the pastor's kids that are the worst. I was the definition of that saying. And obviously, even though I said, listen, God, I want nothing to do with you, part of me still knew
For sure
that if my parents found out and I wasn't right, I knew I wasn't right. That knowledge, though, wasn't a conscious thing. It was a subconscious thing. I was always anxious. And that's when my anxiety started. When you are doing things and you know that there's a possibility you're going to get caught. Yeah, no, you're always at the edge of your seat. I'm constantly anxious. And I also had a lot of social anxiety for what happened in primary school. I'm always trying to like put my best foot forward, and I care too much about what people think. I had a horrible self-image.
Wow.
I thought everyone was looking at me. Looking back at pictures in high school, I'm a very attractive young girl, and I wasn't the ugliest duckling of the batch, but there I was the ugliest.
That's how you felt.
That's how I felt. Yeah. I always felt like all these girls were just so much more better and mature and sophisticated. And then, I was like the ugly duckling. And so you try so hard. You start off with things that are small, and then Satan has a way of, you get to a point where you don't know what's going on with you anymore. I had a group of friends. I would have sworn that they were friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. They helped me lie. Now drinking is something that happens.
How does that go like at home though?
I can pretend really well.
Okay. Obviously you said the edibles aren't detectable, but alcohol is detectable on breath a lot of times.
Yes.
I mean, there is ways, but.
Here's the thing. I was like playing two different characters.
Okay.
And it was two different characters. I was never at home. I was myself. And then at school, I was like this. At home, I was playing the girl my parents raised.
Yeah.
The pastor's kid. I could go to church and I could lift up my hands in song service and I could mimic the sound of praying in tongues, because I grew up around that. My whole life it was shandararap. You can do things like that. And I would go to school and I was this really cool, very quirky girl. I was very ambitious and wild, if you would call it that. And that wasn't the case. My parents didn't know, none the wiser. I got to the point where I convinced myself that I liked women.
Okay.
If you had asked me at that time, I was a full-blown lesbian. I liked girls. I think it was in that phase where my parents were starting to kind of see, okay, something's wrong with my child, because you can't hide homosexuality.
Yeah.
Especially with how in touch my parents are with their relationship with Jesus. You can't hide that spirit.
Yeah. So I have a question, just going to that real quick. I know it's a delicate subject, so I appreciate you talking about it. But was there somebody that influenced you that way?
Yes.
Okay. Regardless of what people think, it's a spirit and it comes through influence. And so I was just curious what was the initial thing?
Yeah. I had a friend, a very close friend in high school. We were friends from grade 8 and she was a bisexual. And at the start of it, it made me uncomfortable because I was raised, it's a sin. But hanging out with her and, just seeing her as human and not really someone that likes girls, that was a door open. And you don't blame the devil for everything. But he just sent me homosexual friends from that point. The people that were my support and the people that accepted me and like what I wanted, they were all gay.
Yeah.
For a while, I was the straight friend. That does not work. That does not last. This wasn't a thing of I need to like fit in with these people, or maybe it was, I'm not sure. But I would see a pretty girl on the street and now I'm confused if what I'm seeing is attraction or admiration.
Exactly.
Am I like admiring her or am I genuinely attracted to her?
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I was genuinely attracted to women. There was that romantic and that physical attraction to women. My friends, they were all for it, you know. Now it was the thing of like, hey, I need to keep this from my parents because I had a girlfriend during this time.
Yeah. And she didn't know.
Mom suspect.
Like you said, your parents are very close in their relationship with God.
Yes.
So the thing is that your spirit is uneasy. Your spirit tells you things and you're just like, man, something is off.
Something's off.
You can't even necessarily put your finger on it. We have the situation, you know, one of my sons, when he was quite young, was sneaking around and seeing a girl. As a parent, it's not like we knew that, but you just, something is not right. Something is going on. And so parents can pick it up, you know?
Pick it up, yeah.
You said you had dated. Did you date boys as well? Okay.
Yeah, I did. So it got bad because I hated myself so much for most of my high school life. And I think for most of my life, I couldn't look in the mirror. I would avoid any reflective surface, like actively go out of my way to avoid windows and looking at myself in the mirror. I hated it. That obviously got worse when I was now smoking and I was getting high and all this nonsense that we were catching on. Then here's now this homosexuality thing. Now I've convinced myself that I like girls. Again, subconsciously, I knew I was wrong.
Yeah.
And so that shame and that guilt, it kind of just grows. And that's when the depression started. Like the heavy depression and the cutting myself. And it was always a thing of like, I'm such a mess up. I'm such a screw up. I'm going to cut myself because I deserve it.
Did your mom ever see that? Because I know you're a house full of girls.
I don't want to bash my mom, but I did tell her and her reaction made it worse. Whenever I would say I was depressed or anxious, my mom, not understanding, and it's no fault of her own.
No, I understand.
Would kind of be like, you're doing it for attention. You're doing it because your friends are doing it. And now I get it. She doesn't know the full story of what I was doing at the time, which caused me to be depressed. So they took off my door at one point. And it didn't help. And I felt like that act was broken because I'm supposed to be put together and I'm supposed to be okay. My parents are not supposed to be disappointed at me. And now they saw that I wasn't okay. It just made me feel like, see, now your mom and dad are angry at you. You're even a bigger failure.
I think you made a good point as a parent myself. You think you know everything that's going on with your kids and you don't. And you think that you're always going to act in the best way. And then a lot of times it's not till hindsight that you're like, man, I really should have handled it differently. But I like that you pointed out that she didn't know.
She didn't know.
She didn't have all the information. So from the perspective of this is a Christian girl in a Christian home, she's just acting up.
Which from her perspective, because of how I was acting and my facade, genuinely she thought that how does this child go home on fire for God and then come home and it's completely different.
Exactly.
Also, my mom had a tough life. And so she was always like, but you're not going through what I went through at home. So you've got no reason to be the way that you are now.
Again, she didn't have
She didn't know.
Now, she probably would have reacted completely different. I just want to be clear. It is dicey, but at the time...
I don't blame my mom, and she acted the way she knew how. I mean,
sure.
Now, because of this complete self-hatred and stuff, I started to question whether or not I was a girl or a boy. And I swear there was this constant thing. That's why you hate the way your boobs look, or you hate your hips, or you hate the fact that your hair is this way, or you hate your chubby cheeks or your eyes. All my very, very feminine features, because deep down I'm supposed to be a boy.
You're having an identity crisis.
I'm having an identity crisis, and it's going the wrong way. You know, it's going the path I don't want it to go down. And obviously, the friends that I had at the time were super supportive of my wrong decisions and my bad judgment. My name changed from Cathleen to a boy name, and they started calling me he, they.
Did you ask them to?
I just said I was confused, and they're like, why don't we try out, you know? And for a long time, I felt false sense of validation, or this false sense of like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
I completely got rid of anything girly in my life. I stopped wearing color. I stopped wearing dresses. I never did my makeup. I never did my hair. I didn't do anything that could remotely classify as feminine. I always thought that I'm not supposed to be a girl.
Did your sister ever pick up on anything?
Yeah, I'm sure she suspected.
Okay. I mean, she's younger, but she's pretty savvy. So
yeah, I don't think she understood it was to the point when I was questioning my gender.
but she knew
But
something was
my whole family knew because I would always be defensive. And my dad was like, why are you so passionately defending them? Something's not right.
Okay.
Obviously, there was that. And then I don't know when this happened. There was the porn addiction. And so now there's just everything in my life. I lost my innocence there. I knew so much information that I shouldn't have known.
I don't know if you heard, we had a podcast on here and she was introduced to porn at school.
It was, but it wasn't an introduction.
Yeah.
It was more of people talking about certain sexual activities. And because I grew up in a very sheltered home, look, I knew what sex was.
Yeah.
Like the basic biological, what happens.
Yeah.
But now they're talking about all these different things and I don't know. And the internet is completely free, you know, and I have my phone and you search things up and obviously it goes from one video to two videos. And then next thing you know, it's just like a full-blown habit because you're curious.
I mentioned this when I was doing the other podcast too, because it's something that is really not talked about as a young girl. We just automatically think, oh, that's a boy issue.
Yeah.
But our girls are so vulnerable, especially as hyper-sexualized as the society gets. It's a two-gender problem, right? It's so destructive. And it's sad because it's getting introduced younger and younger. But it isn't necessarily talked about with girls.
Oh, when it came to the porn thing, that was a very, very private thing. But it did give me knowledge. Teenagers talk sexual things.
Yeah.
Almost all conversations around anything that a bunch of teenagers are talking about, male or female, it's sexual.
Yeah.
So now I wasn't standing there like, oh my word, what's this, what's that? I knew. So now I could add on to the conversations and now I could participate. No one ever questioned where I got that knowledge from.
I just like going back to the fact that it was another way for you to just fit in. Exactly.
Yeah, it was. So it got to the point where I was depressed. I was in this constant state of anxiety and I was having panic attack after panic attack. I couldn't even go to the shop assistant and ask, hey, where's this jacket? Because I would have a full-blown anxiety attack. The thought of me having to speak to somebody in crowds or public, I didn't want to interact with my family. I didn't want to speak to my sisters, nothing. I was in my room all the time.
Wow.
And that didn't help because I was in my room all the time with my cell phone. And now the internet's free.
Yeah.
It's not safe. And it was bad. And I remember I was at my aunt's house and she has this corny little poster on her wall that says, in this house we forgive. Subconsciously, I was like, I hope my parents can forgive me because I knew that what I was doing was going to come out. It was at that point where I was heavily addicted to porn. I was going through all of these things. I was questioning whether or not I was a boy or girl. I was saving up money to buy a binder because I didn't want my boobs to show. And my parents found out. I think I didn't remove my search history or my Google history well enough. And they found out about the porn. They didn't find out about anything else. This is the only aspect they're going to find out about. I had to sit there in that room as my dad was going on and on about how, you know, I let this demon into my life and I opened doors. And my mom was crying. She was so disappointed in me. I would love to say in that moment I got it and it clicked. But in that moment, I was like, I'm gay. Do you know how much other doors have opened up? As long as I hide the fact that I like girls better, you know, now I know how to better hide things on my cell phone.
Wow.
And you know, you do the mock thing. You go at the altar, God forgive me, shed a few tears, earn mom and dad's trust back. And the porn didn't stop. The homosexuality didn't stop. I just hid it better at that point.
How old were you at this time? Like when they
16.
Okay.
And that's when the suicidal things like really, really just, it was bad. I didn't have access to medication, like, you know, strong pills to overdose. There's no place for me to go hang myself. But we do have very sharp knives. And I was already in the habit. I never cut my wrist because people would see, but I would do my upper thigh, I would do my stomach, I would do my sides. And I was like, oh, I've got a knife and I know where all my arteries are. I'm going to slit my wrist. That was something that was always on my mind. I was always waiting for the opportunity. It was bad. I was not happy at all.
Did you ever get to the point of close calls?
Yeah, 5 times actually.
Wow.
And this is where I feel like God really, really did protect me because every single one of those times there was some form of interruption. I remember one time I had a huge fight with my mom. Like I had a big full-blown argument with my mom. And I was like, I'm going to slit my throat and my mom's going to come find my bleeding out body in the room. And that's what I wanted. Right? And my sister walks in. I don't know what really needed in my room, but she walks in, she sits on my bed, she does her thing, she leaves. And by the time she left, I was already out of that headspace. I was still in a dark corner, but it wasn't that dark anymore. Like I was focusing on something else. There were many, many close calls.
Wow.
But I think the closest was Wednesday during exams. I said, Dad, listen, I'm writing math the next day. I'm horrible at math. So my dad was like, you know what? Stay at home, do your thing. And no one's in the house. I'm by myself. And I wrote my suicide note. I had it all down. It was this long apology of how I'm such a screw up. I'm sorry. And I'm there. I was in a trance. I can't remember how long I was there. And as the knife is at my throat and I'm applying pressure, the gate opens. They forgot something from the house.
Oh.
And we were in Innerdale at the time, and they came home super early because no one showed up at church. And the gate opens, and Shailene ran, and they burst into the house full of energy and loud. And obviously, you scramble and you hide the knife and you wipe up and you do the things. That was when my mom, she comes and she tells me, you know why your second name's Hannah was because the same way Hannah gave Samuel to God as her first offering, we gave you to God. We've always practiced giving your first fruits. And she kept on going on about how God has a plan for me and how he's going to do this big thing. And I remember sitting there thinking, this woman has no idea what I've done. She's got no idea what I'm involved with.
Wow.
You know, I'm not the Christian little girl that she raised, and I'm not. And you know what? It was in that moment, it was kind of like God spoke to me. It's kind of like, are you done trying to do this by yourself?
Wow.
Because when I said, I want nothing to do with you, he's like, okay, fine. Let's see how you cope by yourself. And then when you're ready, you'll come back. And I remember breaking down that same night, like, yeah, Lord, I can't do this anymore. That was Wednesday. And then the Friday, I got caught again for all the porn that was on my phone.
Mm.
And then the following Sunday, I went on my knees in church. I was like, Jesus, I can't take it anymore. Really, I can't. And I was forgiven for my sins. But, you know, you've got these miraculous stories of how life just was fixed for you. I had to work really, really hard to get back to that level of faith and salvation. Giving my life to Jesus the second time was not like the first time. Yes, he saved me. You know, I'm new, but now I had to like actively close all the doors that I opened up. And I remember I stopped drinking. I stopped doing weed completely. I went the Monday, I broke up with my girlfriend. But the fighting off that attraction to women and then the porn, that was something that I really had to pray and work. Like, Lord, I need you to help me out. Those didn't just disappear.
Yeah. So you prayed, was it that same night, that Wednesday?
Yeah.
So that was the tipping point. So you prayed by yourself in your room.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday again, you went forward.
Yeah.
I know when you guys got here, you also answered the altar call.
The Wednesday, my mom gave me the speech. The Friday, my parents found the porn on my phone. But now this time, when I had that conversation, I already felt guilty. I genuinely felt guilty.
Yeah.
But I stepped forward because my dad said, you need to step forward. So that Sunday, we were kind of still in Innerdale. I went because Dad said we must. And then I think it was about 2 weeks later when my dad was like, we're coming back from Innerdale. But when I came back to Aldo's and I answered the call, that was not because my dad said I had to. That was because I genuinely came to the conclusion that I can't do it anymore. Suicide was always the thought. If that gate did not open up that Wednesday, I would have been dead. Because I got to a point that was so dark. I was excited to die.
Wow.
Later on, you realize that you don't want to die. You kind of just want to kill off your demons and you don't know how to separate yourself from them at the time.
That is a really good way to say that. That is actually brilliant. We know suicide is a spirit, like you said.
I had so much going on and I didn't know how to separate that from myself. I thought that was myself. So I felt like in order to kill all of that off, I needed to kill myself.
And that's the ultimate joke that the devil tries to play. That's not the answer. No. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you did point out that it took you a little while, but you opened so many doors.
Yeah.
Yes, everything is forgiven by God. We know that.
Yes.
But I like that you said you knew you were forgiven, but there was some things that you just
there were things. I'm 17 years old now and I'm saved and I'm on fire for God, but I was still addicted to pornography. Like, why can't I just like kick it? You know, I was able to stop liking girls when I was in Aldo's and I went down and I prayed. I woke back up and that whole attraction to women was completely gone. It was weird because one moment I liked girls. I was physically attracted. I stand up from the altar. I don't see girls in that light. Now the idea of being with a woman upsets me and it disturbs me. But the pornography thing was just so difficult to kick.
Yeah. It's just easy.
And it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. It's in songs. It's in media. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't find a good book that's not written by a Christian author without it somewhere being in there. So that was difficult. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? It's this constant, I'm sorry. And then I find myself relapsing. This constant cycle of me going back. Then what also never went away was this inferiority complex. It wasn't until very, very recently that I had to make up my mind that God loves me.
Yeah.
It was always a thing of like, Jesus is going to bless and he's going to help and he's going to be there for everyone, but you don't get that. You were on fire, you messed up so bad, and now you want to suddenly come back.
That is so demonic too. That condemnation is so hard.
That wasn't until very recently where I made up my mind, no, God does love me and he will bless me and I'm okay. But it's still a struggle having to look at other people and not compare myself.
I think some of that is human nature. I think we all kind of struggle with that a bit. But the shift is different, right? Now you know when it comes
that it's demonic. I'm not going to do those things. So that helped. And I don't know when it was, but I came to the realization, especially when it came to the board thing, that I just gave the devil too much power. I felt like it was such this big demon and I couldn't fight it. And it's kind of like God saying, if you just decide to stop and switch off your phone, you'll stop and switch off your phone. Like you can leave. And you're praying, and God is like, okay, so just switch off your phone and walk away. God is like, Cathleen, you can walk away. And I did. Then after that point, I was like, I can walk away.
Isn't that amazing? You really given me some good thoughts today. When you said we give him too much power, we think it's so big, but some things are not. Like you just said, walk away. And that's what gave you the dominion you needed.
And I was like, you know what, you're right. Because I always felt like I was weak. I messed up and I fell off and I wasn't strong enough because I'm just weak. And God is like, no, man, just switch off your phone and walk away.
I love it. Wow.
So I did that. Obviously, the voice in temptation got a lot softer and it went away. Now it's not even a thought.
That's amazing.
But I also felt like there was something wrong with me. So you would see all these new converts around and they're on fire for God. And I've got this mountain of baggage that I kind of just need to go through and declutter and get rid of.
Yeah.
Other people around you that answer the altar call at the same time and they're just getting it, and then you can see it and you know what's happening in your heart and in your head.
Everyone experiences salvation different and it can be frustrating when you think, how come it wasn't the same for me?
Yeah, people got it, and the cycle really broke me. It was always this thing of see, you weren't good enough in primary school. You weren't good enough in high school. Now you're not a good enough Christian because you're struggling and you're fighting. Those voices aren't even completely gone.
Yeah. But of course, we're all human, right? The point of doing this is the salvation. People only see what you let them see. And so obviously I didn't know anything about you, which is super cool because I felt like I had the same kind of shock with your mom when we sat down and talked. We literally were just talking about the reason I love doing this is because I get to see how God cares so much. Those interventions.
He did, because I know how South Africa works. If I had actually cut my artery, ambulance wouldn't have gotten in time.
For sure.
My parents wouldn't have been able to get me to the hospital in time. It takes the average of 5 minutes to bleed out. I would have died.
Yeah.
There was no surviving that attempt.
Well, especially because no one was home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be one of those survives a suicide attempts, not with how I wanted to go out.
Yeah.
And God was like, I'm not going to let it get to that point. And I'm so grateful he didn't let it get to that point. Life is much better for me now.
Yeah. You obviously got involved in ministry in the church. after you got saved and stuff. And then how did you meet your husband? I know you guys started as friends.
We did. So I've mentioned quite a few times that I'm an actor and I love acting. And so the church has their first big production. Since I'm back, it's the first big thing. So I signed up, not thinking I was going to get a very important role. So then I got my script and I was playing Susan. And Susan had a husband named Richard. And then the person playing was Sanele. And I remember looking at Sanele at the time. I'm like, Sanele. And then he walks in his shorts and his little hat that he always wears. And I remember going, ish. Not a good way. They're like, oh, okay, so that's who I'm walking with. And he forced his way into my space. I was still very reserved. I don't want to talk to anyone. I developed this very introverted personality.
You're trying to reinvent yourself.
Yeah. And this guy would sit behind me and start conversations. I didn't have the guts to say, go away. So he's there and he's talking and he's talking and he's talking. And he would constantly do this. And it wasn't until I was married, he told me that I knew you didn't like me. So I fasted and I prayed for you.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? Oh, wow.
He fasted and he prayed.
That's awesome.
Because he knew I had no interest in him.
So what switched for you?
I got to know him. So at first it was like this really cool guy. When I was before we got launched out, my Sunday school teacher at the time made us write down all of the things we wanted in a husband.
Wow.
That was a list that I forgot about. And then I got saved and I'm a little bit older and you update the list, And it was like I would interact and I would see him. And then in my mind, it was like a tick from the list.
Wow. So what were some of the things on your list?
I wanted someone that was hardworking. Okay. And I would see how he would be around the church. And he was in almost every ministry and he was just so willing to help. Also wanted someone that could really take authority because I'm not that person. I know I come across as a very confrontational person. I'm not. And he was managing the guys at the rehab at the time and he would give instructions, but he could take instructions and he could take correction, which was something really nice. But a big thing for me was he needed to love kids. My entire calling, and this is something God has called me to do, involves children. So I was like, if this man does not love kids as much as I love them, it's not going to work. And it was a healing crusade. And all the other ushers and disciples were seating to the big person. And there was Nele. He was playing with the kids, interacting with the kids, making sure. And when I saw that, I was like, that did it for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know it was a little different because you were still in school.
Yes.
You finished school, but you guys talked and...
We talked the whole of my matric year.
You dated without dating.
It felt like dating because when we finally did officially, nothing changed.
It was just for your parents' peace of mind.
That's a name.
Your mom's going to listen to this, I'm sure. Sorry, Lindsay. We just changed words for you.
Yeah, that was it. But that was also another thing that really did a lot for me because I never had any sexual experiences throughout all that I was doing, and I thank God for that. There was one of the boyfriends that I had, and we were cool, we were nice. I just refused to have sex with him. And me downright refusing, I got dumped the next week. And then he proceeded to go date girls exactly like me that were just willing to give him what he wanted. So now I meet Sanele and I'm like, I'm still in school and you're going to have to wait because we met the end of 2023. So I was like, you have to wait the end of 2023 and the entire 2024 only for us to get married. And dating in the partner's house is not dating in the world. There's just a lot of things you don't do.
Physical stuff.
Yeah, a lot of physical stuff you don't do. And this man was like, cool, I'm cool. He waited that entire year. He didn't hold my hand. I hugged him for the very first time the night he proposed.
Do you know what a miracle that is, though, giving your past?
Yes.
Given your past.
Yes.
Like, that is amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Our first kiss was on our wedding day.
Wow.
When I said my vows in front of the whole church, that was the very first time I kissed my husband. So the fact that he was willing to wait and be patient, and the fact that this man looked at me with love and not lust was completely different.
And I will say that all of us watching you guys date, in air quotes, we loved it. Like, literally, everyone would always be like, oh my gosh, they're talking. They're so cute. But God knew that's what you needed. The whole relationship, like, every time we'd even say the name Cathleen, so Nellie would just be like, blushing. He literally...
I don't know what I was doing. I was in the kitchen yesterday and I'm at home. It's a Saturday. My hair's not brushed. I'm not in the nicest clothes. He's working. He comes back and he was like, yo, I got a beautiful wife, in all seriousness. And then he continues what he does, kisses me, and then goes back outside. I found my self-worth and I found my value in Christ. Sanele didn't fix me. But going from a place where I thought everyone thought I was really ugly to having this man look at me like I'm the most beautiful thing in the world, it was a nice change of pace.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I think God gave you the desire of your heart. Sometimes when we mess up so big, the blessing is also big.
Yeah. And I got very lucky.
It's not luck, it's blessing.
Blessing.
So would there have been something that could have changed at that point when you were going through all that? Or is there something that you just want to say that would encourage?
A lot of the time when you're battling with self-image, you think the whole world sees you. People are so self-absorbed in their own lives, no one really watches what you do. And I feel like if I come to that realization a lot sooner, I wouldn't have dealt with as much I was dealing with. But for those that are dealing with self-worth issues, you're not going to find validation anywhere else but in Jesus Christ. I tried fitting in with all the different friends because I didn't feel like I was worthy. It wasn't until I came face to face with Jesus and when I learned that he loved me and he died. This man was beaten beyond recognition. His own mom couldn't recognize him and he went through pain and ridicule and stoning and mocking so that I could have a relationship with him. That is when I realized just how much I was worth.
Yeah.
And a lot of young girls suffer with this. Jesus died a horrible death so that you can make heaven your home. And if the creator of the universe can humble himself to die for your sins, then by all means you are worth everything in the world.
That's amazing. So thank you very much.
No problem.
Wow, it was intense and I'm really grateful. As always, I want to say thank you to each and every person who listens. Without a listener, the story can't be heard. If you would like to contact me with questions, comments, or ideas, please do so through the dedicated podcast email, notthesame.cfm@gmail.com. If you get a chance, take a moment to rate and review on whatever platform you're using. Subscribe, follow, but most of all, please share this with someone. Last but not least, I want to encourage you to take a moment and examine your heart. If you are not a Christian, or you're unsure, or you're really struggling like we heard today, you can be. God loved us so much that he sent his only son to die for our sin. Just like Cathleen said, a simple prayer is all it takes. Until next time, I'm Rachel Heinberg, and that was another person who's not the same.